Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to do absolutely nothing? You stand in line for 30 seconds. Your hand reaches for your phone. You sit down to eat alone. A video starts playing. You wake up before your alarm. Instead of lying there, you start scrolling. It's such a normal part of life that most of us never question it. We just assume humans hate being bored. But if that were true, some of the oldest discoveries humans ever left behind should not exist. For almost all of human history, there were no phones, no endless entertainment, only long winters, long journeys, long nights. From a modern perspective, ancient life should have been unbearably boring. So how did they deal with it? The obvious answer is that they found ways to pass the time. But archaeologists keep uncovering evidence that doesn't quite fit that story. People fighting to survive still made art, music, tiny statues, decorated tools. On the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, researchers discovered cave paintings more than 50,000 years old. They don't just show animals, they appear to show a scene, a story. And the deeper researchers dig, the stranger it becomes. To understand why, you have to step into their world. People living on the edge of survival should not have spent precious energy making art. Unless those long empty hours were not as empty as we imagine. Imagine a child pressing a hand against a cave wall beside an older relative. Neither of them knows. People will still see that mark 50,000 years later. Maybe when the hunt was over and darkness arrived, people filled the silence by painting. Except the evidence refuses to stay simple. And it wasn't just art. Ancient people carved tiny statues. They shaped jewelry from shells and animal teeth. They decorated tools that would have worked perfectly well without decoration. Long before writing existed, someone decided that survival wasn't enough. Something had to be made beautiful. Then there is music. Long before kingdoms and cities, roughly 40,000 years ago, someone shaped bone and ivory into flutes. Suddenly they stopped looking like entertainment. They look important. The art was how ancient humans dealt with boredom. Archaeologists can uncover bones and tools. But what they cannot dig up is the thought that started the first painting. The mystery only gets worse. Across many traditional hunter-gatherer societies, anthropologists notice another pattern. When the day's practical work was over, people gathered not to hunt, not to build, not to make tools, sat around fires. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years studying campfire conversations among hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert. What she found was baffling. During the day, most conversations were practical. Food, hunting, logistics. But at night around the fire, the conversations changed. Stories, myths, adventures, people imagining places they had never seen. Maybe boredom disappeared, because stories and songs filled the long nights. Somewhere, a child hears the same story their grandparents once heard. Perhaps humans survived boredom by surviving it together. But another clue refuses to fit. What if our ancestors were not trying to entertain themselves at all? Some songs were so important that forgetting them could be dangerous. In Australia, certain songlines preserved information about water sources and travel routes across vast distances. Long before maps existed, people were carrying maps inside their heads. Long before writing, memory had to live somewhere. Ancient stories remembered rivers, described animals, explained which plants healed and which ones killed. Songs carried information. Rhythms carried memory. Perhaps it was not decoration. Perhaps it was instruction. A forgotten story could cost a group its survival. Perhaps empty moments were being turned into knowledge. But one question still remains. Why did humans keep returning to these quiet moments in the first place? What if we have been making the same mistake all along? What if art, stories, or songs were not the answer? What if they were all consequences of something deeper? In the early 2000s, neuroscientists noticed something unexpected. When people stopped focusing on a task, parts of the brain became more active, not less. The brain seemed to come alive during the exact moments we would describe as doing nothing. Researchers eventually gave this network a name, the default mode network, and it appeared to be involved in remembering, imagining, and exploring possible futures. Now think about the world our ancestors lived in. Hours of walking, hours of waiting, long nights around a fire, journeys across open land. periods where there was no obvious task demanding every second of attention. Those empty spaces may not have been empty at all. They may have been workshops, places where experiences became stories, stories became inventions. This may be why archaeologists keep finding the same pattern. Art, music, symbols. Not because ancient humans defeated boredom, but because boredom gave the human mind room to build something. And if that is true, one uncomfortable question begins to emerge. What happens to a species that suddenly stops having that space altogether? No archaeologist can answer that. Many of us have become remarkably good at escaping empty moments. Waiting, standing in line, walking alone. Silence appears and a screen lights up. We assume this solves the problem. But in 2024, researchers at the University of Toronto discovered something unexpected. People who constantly switched videos, skipped ahead, or searched for something more interesting actually became more bored, not less. The very behavior meant to escape boredom seemed to make it worse. And then there is an even more extraordinary finding. In 2014, researchers at the University of Virginia placed volunteers alone in a room with nothing to do. Many chose to give themselves electric shocks, rather than sit quietly with their own thoughts. Not because the shocks were enjoyable, because doing nothing felt worse. A species that spent thousands of generations filling quiet moments with stories, memories, and imagination may have become deeply uncomfortable with having them at all. Maybe the question we started with has quietly changed. We wanted to know how ancient humans survived boredom, but maybe the real mystery is different. What if boredom was never the thing they were trying to escape? Imagine two humans. One sits beside a fire tens of thousands of years ago. The day's work is over. The world has gone quiet. Above them, there are only stars. And yet, somewhere in moments like these, people began telling stories, remembering old hunts, imagining new lands, turning memories into songs. Somewhere, someone picked up a bone flute for the very first time. They could not have known that tens of thousands of years later, we would still wonder why. Now imagine someone standing in a grocery store. The line stops moving. A hand reaches into a pocket. A screen lights up. The silence disappears. Perhaps our ancestors were never trying to kill boredom. Perhaps they were turning it into something else. Paintings, songs, stories, entire civilizations. Maybe that is the real mystery. Not how ancient humans escaped boredom, but what they built from it. The paintings survived. The songs survived. The stories survived. But perhaps the one thing that slowly disappeared was the quiet space that made them possible. And possibly the most inexplicable discovery of all is that they may have left that instinct behind for us, waiting quietly for the next moment when nothing happens. Maybe boredom was never the real mystery. Maybe the real mystery is this. If there were no offices and no schedules and no careers, what filled an ancient human's day?